Heart disease? In my Roman emperors? It's more likely than you'd think. Emperor Hadrian, famous for building a wall and having the Scots pay for it, is one of the Roman emperors who didn't die murdered. But when you read the history, things seem to go from business as usual to all of a sudden he's sick and dying. So, what sickness and why so suddenly? So, we're going to go over the historiography of Hadrian's death as well as the pertinent history, second and third hand physical exams, and then try and tie everything together. There are four written sources to consider. The first two are Roman histories by the famous Cassius Dio, as well as the anonymous Historia Augusta. The next is a 1980 piece by what looks like a man of Cretan origin, Acus, like Dukakis, usually Cretan, who also cites these two sources and incorporates others to make the claim Hadrian's death is from his heart. This same 1980 piece cites a German journal out of Russia from 1911, where the author proposes both a heart defect as well as nephritis as the cause of death. I'll tell you, not an easy find. So Hadrian dies in 138, and the earliest writings we have is what we have left from Cassius Dio, who was a 2nd and 3rd century gentleman whose work was rediscovered in the following millennium, as well as the Historia Augusta, meaning History of the Emperors, written well over a century after his death. So take these with a grain of salt. Regarding Hadrian's illness, Cassius Dio tells us that he now began to be sick, for he had been subject even before this to a flow of blood from the nostrils, and at this time it became distinctly more copious. Hadrian became consumptive as a result of his great loss of blood, and this led to dropsy, which is just edema. And consumptive in this sense refers to wasting, not tuberculosis. He keeps going. By certain charms and magic rites, Hadrian would be relieved for a time of his dropsy, but would soon be filled with water again. Finally, he abandoned his careful regimen, and by indulging in unsuitable foods and drinks met his death, shouting aloud the popular saying, "Many physicians have slain a king." Do I trust the acumen of Roman doctors and their treatments? Kind of. It seems to have worked until Hadrian stopped taking their advice. Do I trust the veracity of a retelling of a second-hand source from 2,000 years ago? Sort of. Most of the controversy surrounding Hadrian has to do with his character, not his health. So I doubt anyone would have much reason to lie about the mechanism of his demise. Medically, there are only so many things that can cause such crazy edema. From top down, we have heart failure, pulmonary hypertension leading to heart failure, cirrhosis, renal failure or issues, as well as hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia if it leads to liver dysfunction. That German-written, Russian-published piece from 1911 chalks up Hadrian's death to both a nephritis, which is an inflammation of the filtering portion of the kidney, as well as a nondescript term to refer to heart trouble. It's certainly tasty, but usually in medicine there's just one thing going on, and that one thing affects many others. If you have multiple sclerosis and a new eye blindness, it's probably not a stroke, but just worsening of the MS. This is the approach Doc Nicholas Petrakis took, with Hadrian's history of nosebleeds and a very aggressive personality. The idea is that he had hypertensive heart disease, which will certainly lead to heart failure in more than one way. And like Cassius Dio says, if you abandon your careful regimen, low salt diet, low fluid intake, you'll definitely balloon up. What tips the scale in his favor is the physical exam finding of Frank's sign, this crease in the ears having a possible association with heart disease seen in several busts of the good emperor. Liver disease, cirrhosis, can lead to coagulation issues that can predispose to bleeding and then cause edema because of low protein. But from the writing, this nosebleed issue seems to have been chronic, so it's unlikely for Hadrian to have had liver issues to the extent where he couldn't clot his blood, but then suddenly develop edema years later. Also, Hadrian is always very active in the histories, so things like fatty liver-induced cirrhosis are less likely. Severe kidney disease from diabetes or nephritis can lead to hypertension, which will always lead to worsening kidney damage, which in its end stage will lead to edema since your body won't be able to get rid of that fluid. End-stage kidney disease is no joke and will sometimes require dialysis, which wasn't around in 138 AD. Also, this version doesn't take into account the nosebleeds going on a while. A nephrotic syndrome, where lots of protein is lost, leading to edema, is possible, but that also doesn't take into account, nosebleeds. A vasculitis, though, like granulomatosis with polyangiitis, can affect the nose and lead to renal failure. But again, renal failure is irrecoverable in antiquity, and GPA is a rapidly progressing disease. He would not have lasted 2 years. Additionally, the typical markings of GPA are a saddle nose from tissue destruction, and we have plenty of busts of Hadrian's that do not show that. You might think he would not have wanted that displayed posthumously, but Roman historians have never been one to leave out someone's deformities. Look no further than my man Lucius Cornelius Sulla Felix, and all we know about his pockmarked face. The nephritis picture also doesn't incorporate the physical exam finding of Frank's sign on his ears. Hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia will cause nosebleeding throughout life and predispose to arteriovenous malformations that can lead to high-output heart failure. But these people will tend to have very notable skin findings that historians are all too happy to mention, which they didn't. Pulmonary arterial hypertension can lead to right heart failure, but doesn't have any nosebleed tendencies. It can also be associated with autoimmune diseases that leave characteristic skin findings not otherwise mentioned. Hypertension leading to heart disease, either diastolic, where the heart fills, or systolic, where the heart pumps, seems to be the scenario that ties all this together, from the history of his personality, predisposing to hypertension, to his physical exam description of edema, to descriptions of fluid restriction as well as diet modification that improved his symptoms, as well as imaging that shows a finding implicated with heart disease. Also, when looking over busts of Hadrian, specifically this one here, found in his mausoleum, I can't help but notice this looks like JVD, jugulovenous distension, which I don't believe has been referenced to this point, and certainly adds credence to the volume overloaded state he was in, as this is a physical exam finding very often seen in volume overloaded states, whatever their cause. Now, I've never been to his mausoleum, and it might be the angle and the lighting, but maybe not. With Hadrian's death decided, the only question left is where you rank him.
Pull that shit up, Jamie.